Hey, what's up, Can't Believers? Welcome back to another episode of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. Today, we're flipping the script on traditional goal setting. And instead of asking you to imagine your best day ever, we're actually going to dive deep into a concept that might just change how you approach your daily routines and long-term aspirations. It's called anti-goals. And it's all about envisioning your worst possible day to avoid making it a reality. So join us as we explore how steering clear of your biggest fears and frustrations can propel you towards massive success. Get ready to learn, laugh, mostly at me, and maybe even wince as we tackle the art of anti-goal setting. Let's get it. Hey, what up, people? We actually have a exciting week for y'all. We're actually dropping 2 podcasts this week, mostly because I decided to be a dad this weekend and missed our deadline. But I also wanted to, as I was getting ready for this episode, I also wanted to bring back sort of a mentorship Monday. And so for our OGs out there, we used to do our mentorship Mondays where we used to do drops on Mondays, and it kind of gave you some clarity and some thought-provoking things to be working on throughout the week. Since then, we've actually switched to our Rituals for Resilience episodes on Friday, but I felt like it was super relative to discuss this because it's actually something that happened for me this weekend. Now, a little bit of backstory. I've been getting to a point, and I've talked about the evolution of my morning routine where it's gone from like the first hour, and sleep was not on the priority list. Like for me, I used to wake up at 5 a.m. I would be regimented about journaling. I would do breath work. I would do meditation, and it just became a whole process. And I found myself getting to a point where I was so rigid about what I was doing that I wasn't actually being present or enjoying the moment. And for any of us who have ever set goals, and for any of us who really thrive on organization, you can probably think back to times where you felt like you were the most effective in rigidity and also hated it at the same time. So my morning routine, as an example, has taken an evolution of simply just making myself coffee in the morning and sitting down and watching ESPN. It's more or less, until Augie or Rory gets up and bugs the heck out of me with all the dad things that they need, or just the love and the cuddles. It's gotten to a point where I can get at least 30 to 45 minutes to myself on a good day, maybe an hour, but I'll wake up naturally around 6:30, and that's the time that I have for myself. So I've been getting into that routine, and I've been finding on Mondays that as I've seen an evolution in the way that I work, I used to put Mondays aside for what I would refer to as CEO Mondays, where those are the days where I would just plan for the week, I would plan the content, I would plan the podcast, I would get done any business finances. I would do all of those things. Well, over the past 2 years, I've taken on Red Bull. I've taken on some other projects. My writing for Men's Health has increased. What I'm doing here has also increased too. So I've been finding that I would get into Mondays and just start working, whether it was client calls or stepping on meeting calls or whatever. I found that even throughout the week, like I just had no rhyme or reason. So I wanted to try something very, very new. And to you all who had listened to this last season, we actually did a 4 to 5 part series on utilizing artificial intelligence on how to boost not only your performance and your productivity, but also your mental performance as well. So I kind of tapped back and I was like, okay, what do I want to do differently? Because getting into the week and just simply white knuckling it is not working for me. Like I don't want to be the type of individual that works for the weekends. So I tapped back into Mind Sarah. And so a real quick refresher for you all. So Mind Sarah is an AI powered journaling system that allows you to submit journal entries. It has a bunch of different prompts that you can start with. So it'll allow you to submit journal entries and then ask AI like, hey, can you take a look at this and look at some cognitive bias? Can you ask me some more thought-provoking questions so that I can get what I need out of this journaling session? So I actually took that this weekend and I was like, you know what, let me try something new because this shit isn't working. And I came across the concept of anti-goals. To you as a listener, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Des, your whole podcast is about the habits and rituals of high-level athletes and entrepreneurs and engaging in their hero's journey so that our listeners and our podcast family can understand like what makes these high-level, high-performing people tick and what can I do for myself. You might be thinking to yourself, well, why the heck are you going that route? Why would you discuss anti-goals if you didn't want us to start not establishing goals and or thinking of goals in a way in a negative light? Well, to answer your question, when we are creating goals, there's a system, right? There's a science to it, there's a process. But that's also not to say that we all are individuals and we work off of different stimulus. Our purpose and our whys are all very different. There might be some similarities in them. So for some of us who are engaging in our fitness routines or engaging in our work and our creative process, like it's very likely that we're doing this either for a family members, or because it's something that we've always wanted in our lives. Like there's a lot of reasons why there might be some carryover into some of the different aspects among all of our pod family as listeners. But I want to challenge you to start looking at some of these tactics in a different way. Now, to give you an analogy of how to introduce an anti-goal in your life, obviously, big shout out, the WNBA just kicked off. If you've not gotten the season pass, make sure you do so. Let's make sure that we're supporting women's sports because all the cool kids are doing it. But the draft just happened, right? Whether it was the WNBA draft or the NFL draft. And I kind of want to give you this analogy of how to understand how anti-goals operate. And so let's put yourself in the chair of a GM. You're going to be the one selecting the athletes, and selecting the right athletes and the right chemistry with the team is going to solidify not only your success, but the fact that you have a job for multiple years, right? So sitting there as a GM, anti-goals are a lot like if you're sitting there and you're understanding the types of athletes and types of players that you need in order to create better team chemistry and better success. The anti-goals are going to operate in, if there's an athlete that even if they were the last athletes on earth, like that, you would not select them. This could be their character, the way that they play, the intangibles like height, weight, like whatever, right? So the anti-goal operates in a way where as a GM, you're just selecting, you're being mindful rather of the athletes that you don't want on your team. Because there's gems in there, because what you get to understand from selecting these anti-athletes, if you will, is the types of athletes that you actually want. And the anti-goals are actually a really good way to provide insight into the types of things that you want in your life, or the types of things that you want to be doing in reference to how you spend your time inside of your habits and your rituals. So now that you have more of that background of how anti-goals operate, that was one of the prompts that I got this weekend. So as I was planning my week, the prompt was, what is considered your worst day? And so I looked at it and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of on two sides of the spectrum. So on one side, what I tend to do if my week is not planned and I'm really struggling to take care of myself in reference to my self-care and my habits and my rituals, I tend to be on one side where I'll spend on a Monday where I'm like, I have to make up for the activity that I didn't get. So I'll spend my time walking, I'll work out, and then I'll get into some meditation or some journaling, and I'll try to do things that are really good for myself. And I was finding that by that time, noon would hit, and all of a sudden, I have this fleeting weight of anxiety on me where I'm like, oh my God, I have so much stuff to do. Where oftentimes I might even stop a workout because I'm like, I just have to stop I have to stop working out so that I can work. And I'm not productive when I do that. And even on the opposite side, I've also been on the side where I'm like, you know what? I have so much to do, where I find myself skipping a breakfast, not hydrating properly, not doing any of my self-care routines. And either way, whichever side of the spectrum you land on, you're not really productive and you're not really getting a whole lot done. And so that was my journaling session inside of Mind Sarah this past weekend. And what I really loved about it is it provided me some insight on one side, my perfectionism, on two, where I'm very hot or cold when it comes to finding a middle ground between how can I take care of myself, how can I plan, how can I be creative, and how can I be productive. I don't have a gray area. I'm noticing that even through this journaling prompt and this journaling journey that I did this past weekend, and I can imagine that a lot of you are on the same boat. So in this case, as I wrote out my worst day, I also put it in bullet points where I'm like, if there's just four high level things that I don't want to be doing, the first thing is going to be not planning the day. That's going to fuck up my day 100%. The second thing is not setting intentions. I don't know about you, but what I find, especially working with athletes and working with other high level individuals like yourself, if we can set an intention for each day, it provides you with an opportunity to go from purpose to process. And when you can align your purpose and be clear on your purpose, then we can start navigating the processes. And the third thing that I found is exercising via avoiding. Now, I don't know if you all experience this, but I do know that sometimes it's a lot easier to go move my body or take care of myself when I actually should be getting that thing done. And I'm sure you all can validate me when it comes to that. And then the last point for me was working through lunch or working through meals, because you all know by now that you have to feed the brain and you have to feed your body in order to be your most effective self, whether that is in fitness and work or whatever that is. Now, if we reposition it of understanding how that comes to fruition in your life by taking the example that I just provided, but let's look at how it might show up in work. So, an example of some anti goals in this area could be, let's say your worst day are the days that you find yourself waking up, picking up your phone right away, checking your emails, checking social. And then before you know it, that burnout cycle starts. And as you get clear into how you operate and work and what the worst day of your life might look like from a work perspective, we can actually start to create some specific anti goals behind what you don't want to happen. Because we want to look at setting anti goals at work. It's like installing a firewall to keep the worst viruses out of your computer, right? That's like the most modern day idea, like example that I can come up with. Because from there, you can start to prevent burnout before it even starts. So instead of waking up first thing in the morning and checking your emails, you're already noticing that checking the emails is the one thing that you don't want to do because it starts you in that cycle of anxiety. What it might sound like is doing something for yourself first thing in the morning and then scheduling time for emails. Or for some of us who have ongoing calls and ongoing meetings, the worst day of your life might just be a full day of meetings, right? And so for you, it goes back to how can I schedule time for myself where I can almost recover and regenerate so that I can go be my best self in this next meeting or in this next pitch or in this next presentation. And it's honestly the same thing in fitness, right? Because if we look at the anti-goals surrounding fitness, the anti-goals might sound like avoiding late night snacks so that you don't feel sluggish in the morning during your workouts. Or it might be that like your worst case scenario is being so time crunched that you're skipping warm-ups and then getting injured. Like that's the worst when we look at like just fitness, right? Obviously performance and other things are aspects, but like let's call it what it is. We don't want to get injured. So the worst case scenario would be obviously not having the time to engage in your warm-ups and then getting injured. So obviously the anti-goal to that is understanding what you need to do inside of the process to help you, because even if we look at fitness, setting the anti-goals is a lot like a personal trainer who's more focused on what you shouldn't do in the gym to keep you safe and improving. Right. So it's almost that different level of accountability that allows you to understand what are the processes that I need in order to show up in a way in my fitness that I feel really good about it. So it does go back to, if it's avoiding late night snacks, is if I'm snacking at night, it might be because of stress, it might be because of hunger. Like, what are some things that I can schedule throughout the day so that I'm not missing meals? On top of, if there's some uncomfortable emotions coming up, how can I get my needs met outside of food? Now, as we sit and sort of allow the last three examples to penetrate our minds and allow you to say, like, okay, what does this do for me and how does it apply for me? Here's how we can set effective anti goals in the easiest of ways. And this can be done on a daily measure, a weekly measure, or even as you do your monthly programming, if you will, for your work and your productivity, as well as your fitness. But in the best of ways, all that you need to do is really just list out, hey, what are the top three things that would be considered like the worst things that you can do? Like your worst case scenario, your worst fucking day ever. What are the top three things that would need to happen in order for that to happen? Because from there, you can take those three things and say, okay, if I gave myself two things to look at, or even just in the best of ways, one thing to look at, what is the anti goal to something that I really want to avoid? Because if we take me as an example, if I'm finding that I'm just white knuckling it through the day because I'm not planning, and not planning the day is considerably the worst possible scenario for me because I know what happens when that happens. Well, then naturally, what I did with those two topics under that worst case scenario inside of anti goals was, you know what, I need to go back to planning the night and saying, what are some of the things over the next day that I need to accomplish? And then in the morning, looking over that list and saying, is this doable? Is this something that I can do throughout the day? Because if I create a nighttime and a morning routine surrounding just planning, then at night I can also measure backwards where I can say what worked and what didn't. And even if we take on the other topic that I had that was like a worst case scenario where I'm like exercising just to avoid things that I don't want to do, it goes back to that concept of eat the frog first thing in the morning. So, what is the biggest thing that I need to accomplish from an ROI perspective? And how can I reward myself with an exercise routine or a walk or something that I know I really enjoy, or playing basketball? How can I do that inside of a reward system that allows me to find some progression? Because I think for a lot of us, if it goes back to how you set anti goals for yourself, is obviously understanding what are some of the things we want to avoid, and in doing so, what are some of the things that are going to help us to avoid those things, and then scheduling them in throughout the day. Now, remember, anti goals aren't something that's relatively new, but if we look at it just from the standpoint of things that we want to avoid, it helps us to understand what, not only what we desperately want to avoid, but it can be just as important as knowing what you want to achieve. Because by defining your anti goals, you're actually setting up guardrails on your own road to success, whether that is on a daily regimen, weekly, or even monthly. Now, all that being said, I would love to hear from you guys to see if this is something that is working. So feel free to tag me in your stories on IG, tag me in a post on TikTok, like whatever social media component that you take part in. I would love to hear from you and understand your anti-goals. Feel free to tag me on IG at DesiAbeta. If you're on TikTok and you're making a post, tag us at I Made It Pod. We would love to hear from you, because over the next couple weeks, we're actually going to do a 3-part series where we discuss legal performance boosters. I know there's been a lot of talk about what's illegal, but in this case, I actually want to talk to you about some of the science around some of the legal ergogenic aids that I think would be extremely relative to how you show up, not only in your fitness, but also in your mental performance as well. I'll catch you on the next one, y'all. Mad love. Peace.